From Deer Park Monastery, it's Meet the Monastics. I'm Brother Min An.
What is more satisfying in life than helping people to transform their suffering? I mean, who cares about money and all this other stuff? The biggest happiness I get is if I can help myself, first of all, but others to transform suffering in a real way. My goodness. If we can do that with only a few people in our life, that's already worth a lifetime, right?
Each week I talk to a different monk or nun about their journey to monastic life and what inspires them now. Today, I'm thrilled to share my interview with Brother Phap Luu, Brother Stream, the most senior non-Vietnamese American monastic in the Plum Village tradition. After spending the majority of his monastic life at Plum Village, France, Brother Phap Luu has been living at Deer Park since the autumn of 2020, and since then has been many things to me: a teacher, a mentor, a colleague, and a roommate, but above all, a good spiritual friend. He's known in our community for his boundless energy. He helped start Wake Up, our initiative for young practitioners, as well as Plum Village's organic farm, the Happy Farm. He also organizes and leads hiking retreats, science retreats, online retreats, and even mindful music festivals, and he has edited many of our teachers' books in English. His interests are vast. In addition to being one of the most knowledgeable monastics in our tradition on Buddhist teachings and history, he loves science, literature, music, and nature. He was born in 1975 and grew up in Connecticut, becoming ordained at Plum Village, France in 2003 at age 28. His parents split while he was studying English literature at Dartmouth College. After he graduated, he spent a few years living in Europe, where he became involved in a political movement of young anarchists squatting in abandoned buildings. At that time, he also met a spiritual teacher, a Westerner who had spent time in India and hadn't touched money in 25 years, who, as he says, broke him out of a normal way of looking at the world. Here's the interview.
But somehow, like I was in this transition period in my early 20s when it was painful and I didn't see the path clearly yet. But I knew that something was going on and I just needed to keep myself from getting locked into some framework in society and just hold out until I could see more clearly what my path is. But that teacher is the one who told me, don't be a Buddhist, be the Buddha. And that had a deep impact on me. And he's also the one that helped me when I met Thay for the first time to see that Thay was a genuine teacher, because I'd met a real teacher before. And otherwise, you can get caught up in somebody can have very flowery language or be very, famous or convincing or somehow, kind of charismatic. And so I'm grateful for that first teacher because he helped me to kind of cut through the things that you can get trapped in with a teacher and so forth in spiritual communities, and to really see the real deal. And I saw that when I first, so that moment when I came back to the States. I also had a period where I lived in an organic farming community. So through that partner of Anna that I'd been living with in the squat, a friend of hers had been involved with a community that had tried to go back to the land in the foothills of the Pyrenees in Aragon, in a town called Sasse. And so a few years before they had occupied the village, it'd been taken over by the government. It's a long story. It has to do with the Spanish Civil War, when they expulsed anarchists from the villages in the mountains in order to get them to work in factories and control them better. So Franco, the fascist dictator of Spain, had been trying to stamp out resistance to his kind of autocratic rule. And so the government had taken over these old villages, which were now in ruins. And so a group of young people had reoccupied the village and started baking bread in the old bakery and turned the church into a school, and had rebuilt one of the buildings as a communal space where you could cook. And so, and then they'd been expulsed by the National Guard the year before. And that was quite a traumatic experience. And I learned about it after that had happened. And a few people had moved back, even though they were not supposed to be there. But none of the children or families, because they didn't want to be traumatized by the police again. So anyway, I lived there for, I don't know, on and off, maybe 4 or 5 months. And that was a very powerful experience because, one, I learned meditation from a guy who came through there for the first time. Nobody had taught me meditation and how to follow the breathing. And then the other is because there was a split in the community and a kind of conflict, which didn't become physical, but it was quite strong around 2 different ideologies of ways to go forward, whether to go in the direction of green tourism and have people come up and learn these simple ways of living, or to open up more fields and try to grow more crops and sell them in the market. And that required violating some laws, like cutting down trees that are not supposed to be cut down, and had serious fines. So that there was a split about what to do, and so when that happened, I saw the danger that comes from getting caught in an ideology. I felt more sympathetic towards the one side, which is wanted to do green tourism. I felt closer to that side, but I also saw that taking a side was, also problematic. I didn't know about Thay's, but that concrete experience really, when I met Thay, helped me to see, how powerful it can be not to take a side in a conflict. And, Thay in the situation, that's just a microcosm of what Thay experienced with the Vietnam War, and not taking one side or the other. But I resonated very deeply with that because of that experience of feeling like a village being split in half by 2 ideologies. It's a very concrete experience. Yeah, and so then I after that experience of a split in the community that I was living in, even it was just a community I lived in for a few months, I felt pretty devastated. And I remember my dad, he was at the time president of a chemical corporation, coming for a trip to London to go to Lloyd's of London, and with his lawyer, who had also gone to Dartmouth, by the way, and was quite happy that I had gone to his alma mater. And having this debate with this lawyer about the creation of wealth in some steakhouse in London, where he kind of like backed off because I was the son of his client. Because apparently he was quite, he was a lawyer that people brought in when they needed to win, and he's very good. Anyway, that was here. I was there with my long beard and kind of anarchist coming from the mountain, and having this debate about the creation of wealth with an LA lawyer. Anyway, I ended up kind of losing my feeling disillusioned by the movement that we were in, feeling like it often just ended up being a confrontation with the police, but we were not really changing anything in a fundamental way. And so I felt like I needed to come back to myself and look more deeply. That something that I learned from this teacher, that I still hadn't gone deep enough inside myself in the practice of non-self, but I didn't really know how. And so my parents asked me to come home. They were, understandably a bit concerned. So I came back. Of course, my parents were divorced, and my mom was in a new house nearby my hometown. Yeah, and I ended up there at the turn of the millennium, beginning of the year 2000. And and just fell into, I had so much anger inside of me through that experience in a political movement of just being in opposition to everything, almost, it seemed, and not having something positive. I mean, my vision to go to an organic farming community was to try to find some positive vision amidst all the negativity that kind of pervaded our movement. going against things. What are we putting forward as a possibility? And and then seeing how the community split so easily, I felt disillusioned. It's like, okay, what is it now? Like, what is my way forward? And I remember meeting with my partner in a squat she was in at that time in Madrid, and just seeing like I have to go inside myself. There's something I need to find inside myself, and so we kind of amicably parted ways. But I also didn't take into account the emotional toll of ending a relationship that had been going on for a year and a half or so, that had been very strong. And so then shifting back to Connecticut, rural suburban Connecticut, and not feeling like I couldn't go to my friends and say, well, this is what I've been doing these past few years from high school and so forth. And and going to my hometown and walking around and just feeling like, where is the world that I knew as when I was in high school, and the friends that I knew, and now I want to come back, to my hometown, but where is my home? And I was really asking myself these questions without ever knowing about Thay and I have arrived, I am home. I was really asking myself deep questions about home, what is real community, and who am I, right? What is my path? More, what is my path and who am I? But I just really wanted to know, what is my path? What is the path that I need to walk on for deep understanding? And at that point, there was so much anger in me that it was really unpleasant, and so it just led to a depression. So I would walk every day in the forest, and with my dog, who was quite old by then, but had accompanied me since I was a teenager on runs in the forest. And he is a great bodhisattva, good friend. And a lot of the healing just came from being in nature, just being in the forest and watching the seasons pass. I mean, it was winter and then the snow, and sometimes I'd go out on cross-country skis. Luckily, I've always been pretty active, so I think that kept me from just getting stuck inside. But I still didn't see where I was going. Like, the normal thing is just get a job, right? And I just didn't feel in any kind of state to get a job. I needed to sort out, like, what is my deeper path in life? And so I'm very grateful for my mom and her patience, because I was probably not very easy to be around at that time. I know I wasn't. And she just suffered when I would try to get in these philosophical discussions about what had been what I had learned or what I had felt about the world. And a lot of it was quite critical of my country and so forth. That was hard for her to hear. But it's easiest for us to be critical of our where we come from, I think. So it got pretty hard. I mean, I remember sometimes just not being able to get out of bed, and just trying. But I think it was just small things, just doing a little bit of gardening or going to paint somebody's house. Doing small tasks for friends of friends, which has slowly helped me to just concentrate on the present moment and not think about so much about the future or what I was going to do with my life. And I did go once, maybe twice, to visit a psychiatrist. I think that's the only time I have. And it was very pleasant. He was more like a friend. I remember he invited me to go to see an artistic dance troupe that was nearby in Connecticut, and I was most grateful for that, not so much for whatever we talked about, but just that I think I just needed a friend at that time, somebody who could appreciate something that I would also appreciate, art. And then he mentioned that there was this yoga place that was nearby where I was living in Connecticut. It's in Southbury, Connecticut. the yoga place was a few towns away, and so I went and learned meditation there, basically, kind of bhakti yoga. So it's a little bit different from what we do. But what was wonderful was the meditation, but also I remember meeting an old couple there and being able to tell the story I'm telling you, and they completely understood. And I just felt so connected and so relieved just to have somebody I could tell this story to that just didn't think I was crazy or would just say, well, you should just get a job or whatever, that somebody could understand the kind of spiritual journey I'd been going on was so meaningful. And then that's when I suddenly realized that there's this network of Dharma centers in the U.S. where people are asking real questions about their life and how to live their life and then I think a couple weeks later I went with my mom to this Chinese Buddhist temple across the border in New York State, the big Buddha statue, which is very close to Blue Cliff Monastery. And they had a free vegetarian meal, kind of like we do here at Deer Park. And they had this little booklet near the Buddha statue, which had what they call the 4 arousings of mindfulness. But it was in Chinese on one page and then in English on the other. And it had this practice, which I had never heard of before, of establishing mindfulness in our body and our feelings and our mental states and in all phenomena. And wow, I just started putting it into practice. I copied it out by hand. I still had the notebook I wrote it in. I was even writing the Chinese characters down. But what happened was that as I practiced what was in that text, I started to feel joy coming back inside of me. And it was the first time I'd really, truly recognized that it was joy that I was generating within myself that was not dependent on something outside of me. It wasn't with the idea that I was an expectation that I was going to get something or that I'd won some award or that I'd gotten into this college or I'd gotten a job or whatever it is or started a new relationship. But this was just a joy that comes from being with my breath, being with my body, being with my feelings. I had never consciously done that before in a kind of methodical way. And so that sutra really, I feel, saved my life. And I say until now that many times I feel it's like the manual for life that I was not given when I was born. And I still go back to it, even now after being a monk for more than 20 years. I feel like that basic practice in the Satipatthana Sutta, or what we call the 4 establishments of mindfulness, is just, I'm not sure you can ever exhaust the practices in that text. And of course it's a compendium of many teachings the Buddha gave in different places, but it's just so comprehensive. And it just brought me back to life. Basically, from that moment, I just literally walked out of the depression. It was quite directly the practice that I needed to deal with the nonstop thinking that I found myself caught in. Sometimes there are some days when some song would get caught in my head, and it was like going through like a machine, and I felt like I would never get out of that cycle of some pop song, some crazy song, but it's just, I would feel like it would never end. And so this teaching on impermanence and seeing that, in fact, that's not what happens, that things do change and the emotion does change. And then it's studying and understanding the nutriment that feeds that. Of course, that came later on, but at that moment, I just practiced being aware of my feelings and noticing their impermanence. So I started, thanks to that practice I learned in the yoga center and with the that little text of the 4 arousings of mindfulness in my hand, I basically developed a daily practice just there in my mom's house of sitting for 40 minutes right after I woke up every morning, and then also for 40 minutes before I went to bed, which I kept religiously, I think, almost every day until I became a monk in Plum Village. Actually, I got more relaxed when I came to Plum Village because I realized that there was a certain rigidity that I had. I mean, which came from my athletic training, because I was very disciplined in the way I trained as a runner. So that kind of regularity, it comes easily to me. That's not hard. What's sometimes harder for me is flexibility and letting go. So that's what I appreciated about the Plum Village practice when I eventually, a few years later, ended up in Plum Village to become a monk. But yeah, I wanted to become a monk right away, but I had about $12,000 in school loans, which is not a lot by today's standards. But without gainful employment, I had to figure out some way to pay that back, and so I was able to defer them a bit longer. And I spent a year. I actually ended up back at my old school at Dartmouth. I realized it became a kind of bookend to my whole experience of being in Europe and what I learned in political movements and spiritually and politically and all these things. I felt like going to a school like Dartmouth, I don't want to go on a study abroad program because I want to be at Dartmouth. I'm paying to go to Dartmouth, So in the end, it kind of became my 3-year kind of personal study abroad program. And by going back there to campus, I kind of brought closure to it. And many students that I'd known as a senior were now seniors. And so I had some connections. And then I actually got one of my old jobs back, which was being a writing tutor for first-year students. And I ended up getting a job teaching cross-country skiing, which I'd barely started doing myself, but I'd been a downhill skier, and so it was very easy. And the manager saw me skiing after the first snow, and he said, "Hey, you want to teach?" And I said, "Okay." So I ended up doing that for a whole winter, teaching people cross-country skiing and skiing around campus, and continuing with my practice of meditation and meeting with students on campus who were also practitioners, getting involved with the we call Happy Farm, organic farm at Dartmouth. And that's where I first learned about Plum Village, actually. One of the young students had been to Plum Village on a study abroad. She'd been in Switzerland on a study abroad and then met some people who brought her to Plum Village. And she said, "Plum Village just opened a center near here." And I saw the way her face lit up. I thought there's something quite special here. But that was the first moment I learned about Plum Village, and I didn't know about Thay. Anyway, I just put it in the back of my mind, and then a couple months later, I had taken up a job at a local bookshop that I'd just seen randomly walking by downtown Hanover, and I think a month or so later, a group of the monks came in one morning, and that's where I met, a few of our elder brothers who are still around. And I felt like they'd stepped right out of the sutras, right into the bookshop. And Phap Luu, the eldest brother, he said, "Oh, we have days of mindfulness. Come up and join us." So I did. I rode my bike out, I think the next week, and went for a day of mindfulness and just met the monks and nuns. And it was like I was seeing people from another planet. I had never seen anybody so mindful as like Sister Chanduk, Sister Annabelle, one of our eldest sisters there, or like the young nuns who were there. They just seemed like angelic. I just never seen people who are so aware of their body, of what they were saying. So I was completely entranced by it, and I thought right away when I got there, I thought whoever set up this community is looking for the long vision. It's not just, I'd been in communities and I'd seen, we're just day by day, seeing how to get by, how to get food to eat or whatever. There's not this long vision that I saw when I went to Maple Forest Monastery, that somebody is a long, however this community is set up, it's thinking in terms of hundreds of years. And somehow I wanted to be a part of that. I felt very connected. And so I came back a few weeks after that for another day of mindfulness, and it turned out they just started a family retreat. And so one of the nuns, who was actually American, who's not with us anymore, but she saw me trying to help out in every which way I could, and she said, "Why don't you stay for our retreat?" And I said, "I can offer a few $100, and she said, "Okay." And so I stayed for 2 weeks, most of 2 weeks, and even after the retreat. I went back for a couple of days to quit my job at the bookstore, and then I came back up and continued practicing in the retreat. And that's when I really saw that not only do I want to be a monk, which I'd already deeply felt from the moment I started practicing meditation. I didn't mention that, but when I had that experience the previous summer of practicing the 4 establishments of mindfulness, I knew right away, okay, I want to be a monk. That's what I want to do with my life. And but I didn't know where or how, so I thought maybe I'll just get on a plane and go to Thailand, or I don't know. And I hadn't come in contact with Thay teaching yet. But then I met, so it's a bit unusual. I think most of our brothers and sisters read Thay's books first, and then they go to the monastery. But in my case, the monks showed up in the bookstore, and then I went up for a day of mindfulness, and then I started reading Thay's books, and just felt like, wow, I was so happy during that retreat, that family retreat. Sister Chanduk came up and gave a talk about the 4 establishments of mindfulness, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's a Zen tradition, and they're talking about the 4 establishments of mindfulness. This is my heaven. It's all exactly what I found beneficial. I didn't mention that I had practiced as well. I'd started sitting zazen in a Korean tradition, the Quantum School of Zen. I stayed after I went to that yoga center. I stayed with the previous summer, 2000. I stayed with my cousin, who was in Boston and was going to this Cambridge Zen Center for they have practice in the morning and the evening, and they allow the public to come in from outside and practice. So I learned to sit zazen style meditation through them, and I'm very grateful to that tradition, because it was, they just let people walk in right off the street in the city and practice meditation. So I'm some teachers that are so dear to me in that tradition, because I love that they have a very engaged practice as well, in the way that they allow their centers to be open. And so all of 1 week I stayed at my cousin's apartment in Boston. He'd just gotten laid off, and the what do you call it, the internet bubble popped when the first .com bust. Yeah, exactly. So they were all they all got fired at the same time. So they were going to the beach on Mondays and enjoying, they're like, wow, this is cool. We're unemployed. So that just happened to him. And so I was hanging out with him in his flat in Boston and getting up early and going out to sit zazen. And at the end of the week, they said, you should move into the center. You really seem to love this practice. And it's ironic that a couple of years later, I did move into the Cambridge Zen Center the year before I came to Plum Village. And I was very grateful to live there, because it allowed me to work in Boston, and which is how I paid off my school loans. Basically, I was working and then living in a place where I could practice in the morning and evening, and also work in the city. So I remember the day I sent my last check into the bank just before I got on the plane to go to France. Very satisfying. Sorry, that's a long answer.
Yeah, wow. Thank you, Thay. You really, yeah, there's a lot of different directions we could go from here. I want to stay on like themes of community and themes of kind of American identity as a monastic,
Yeah.
and also longevity in the practice and as a monastic. You are now more than 20 years a monastic. You're our eldest non-Vietnamese American monk in our tradition. So, it of course begs the question for me in particular, what has allowed you to stay as a happy monk in our community, in this monastic, especially largely Vietnamese community, for so long? And also, what do you wish Westerners understood better that would allow them to stay on the monastic path longer?
Wow. I wish I had the answer to all those questions. I like being a monk. I've liked it pretty much every day of my 20 years or so of being a monk. So it hasn't been very difficult to stay on the path. I'd say I also have a lot of suffering to transform. So, I always kind of, my rule of thumb is that whatever suffering I experience in the monastery would be 10 times worse outside the monastery. So I don't feel very attractive to go out and do something else. And I do think I have a very deep experience through many years of the practice of non-self, and I just don't believe that I am this body. It's just a way too simplistic understanding of the complexity of what is this body-mind complex that we, steward, as it were, in our lives. So I always feel whatever anybody's doing out there in the world, I've already done that in some way, shape, or form, right? So why do I need to do that? Right? I feel deeply also Thay's example. I meet few people out there. I mean, there are amazing people doing amazing things in the world, but I always come back to Thay. I don't know why. For some people, it would be like saying they met Jesus or something. I feel Thay will be seen as one of the greatest human beings of the 20th and 21st century. Maybe I'm a bit biased, right? Because I was close to Thay and saw him in so many different situations. So I feel that very deeply. But I just feel, my goodness, if my suffering is bad, look at Thay. I think Thay was able to overcome vastly more difficult situations of being accused of all kinds of being communist, of being anti-communist, of all kinds of horrible things, and he's able to be a happy monk even amidst all those getting all that kind of compost thrown at your face, to put it nicely. So if Thay can do it, I mean, my goodness, and Thay's a human being and I have a human body, so I can do my best, right? Another thing is I just keep coming back to the fact that the best conditions I see for practice are in the monastery. If they were not, then I would go somewhere else where there are better conditions. But I just don't see better conditions out there for practice. I mean, we can always learn like different techniques from a different teacher. But I resonate with Thay's teaching. In my own experience, I resonate with Thay's teaching that actually ethics is the foundation of everything, of our meditation practice, of awakening. So without the mindfulness trainings, I mean, you can learn new techniques. I mean, there's certainly no shortage of techniques in Buddhism that claim to give you a kind of the highway to enlightenment kind of thing. And I think a lot of Westerners tend to jump on that bandwagon, but in the end, it doesn't last unless you have an ethical foundation to your way of living. So living in a monastic community, practicing the precepts is, for me, the best conditions for transforming suffering. And so, I don't know, it's pretty simple for me. I don't see it as very complex. I mean, it's not like I reevaluate it. I don't hold on to that view. I try to look around me and also try to create around me the conditions for practice in the whatever community I live in. So I feel like I'm contributing to it too. It's not just I'm shifting around looking for the good environment. But I feel that Thay has given us, Thay has done a lot of the hard work for us, of also helping us to root it in the West, which he didn't have to do, by the way. He's kind of thrown into the West by the situation of the Vietnam War. And that I appreciate as well, because I think sometimes teachers come to the West looking for something, whereas Thay came looking to try to find an end to the war in Vietnam, and kind of quite as a secondary, not as his original intention, found himself in the role of a teacher because he was made into a stateless person. He couldn't go back to Vietnam. And so I appreciate that aspect as well, that Thay also sees himself as being thrust into the kind of the course of history by circumstances. And he needed to use his own practice to transform himself first before he could teach anyone else. And so I think, for me, that it's just another testament to Thay's integrity as a teacher. And there's the aspect as well of kind of feeling somewhat of a debt to Thay. I mean, that Thay gave so much to us as his students. I mean, the least I can do is stay a monastic. I mean, Thay asked us to do that, right? So, I want to follow my teacher's guidance. So when I raise my robe up to my forehead and say, how grateful I am for the robe of a monk or a nun. It is a field of great merit. I vow to receive it and wear it lifetime after lifetime. It has a power. You say that over and over again, and sometimes I'm more or less mindful when I say it, but I try to say it with my whole heart before I put my Sangati on. And so that vow has a powerful effect as well, to help me stay here, not try to get distracted. And the things I like to do, I can do in the monastery, mostly. Like now we have backpacking retreats. We started skiing retreats over in France. I mean, skiing was a part of my spiritual path when I was young. I had many now I recognize deep spiritual experiences, being on the mountain alone, in the back bowls of Breckenridge or whatever. I mean, I had the privilege to be able to do that. I'm not proud of it, but anyway, it's something that I did in my family. We were a skiing family. And so those powerful experiences in nature really, I was able to understand deeper through the practice of meditation. And so, I feel some people criticize it, but I think why not do a skiing retreat? I've seen people get deep transformation on a mindful skiing retreat. So for me, that's the important thing. And certainly the hiking retreats that we've done have been very transformative. So what is more satisfying in life than helping people to transform their suffering? I mean, who cares about money and all this other stuff? The biggest happiness I get is if I can help myself, first of all, but others to transform suffering in a real way. My goodness. If we can do that with only a few people in our life, that's already worth a lifetime, right? So I don't need to be famous or, actually that just creates a lot of suffering. But if I can help a few people to transform, when people come to me and they've heard a talk or they put into practice something that I shared in a retreat and they got transformation, I'm so happy. I'm so happy for them. I'm happy, that's what I feel being a good spiritual friend is. So, yeah. So far, it's great.
Awesome. So that segues nicely into the next question that I have for you, which does relate to projects. You have many projects. So just to list a few, you are one of our most sought-after Dharma teachers in the Sangha. You organize online retreats and music festivals. You lead hiking retreats and skiing retreats. As you've mentioned, you're writing a book. You collaborate with scientists studying the effects of mindfulness, and you've helped edit many of Thay's books. So Thay is often talking about how we need to let go of our projects in order to practice well. And I personally find that when I have a lot of projects going on at the monastery, if I'm organizing a retreat or I'm working on whatever, many things at once, it is harder. I find myself in sitting meditation and I'm thinking about those projects, or I'm walking and I get some really good idea about something that I want to do on the podcast or on the retreat I'm working on or whatever. So I do feel like it does create more of a challenge. And that's why Thay often was kind of emphasizing this need to be able to let go of our projects and our thinking. So I want to ask you, how do you do it? Like, how have you managed to do it and still feel like you're living deeply, consistently, throughout your life as a monk?
So in short, I have been able to raise my tolerance level for failure and for, being charged at being irresponsible or reckless in the way I do things to a much higher level. So to back up from that, it means that I've, first of all, been able to let go of the projects, even though I'm involved in them, and just kind of put it out to the universe. Just start stuff and then, see where it goes. And sometimes it's kind of like I was once the gardener here in Deer Park. And that's when I was a novice. It was back 2006. And it was very nice. Then they asked me to do the website. I haven't quite gotten rid of that one. But for almost a year I was a gardener here at Deer Park, and the brother who taught me the garden, he would just kind of go out with a handful of seeds and just throw them randomly around. So you had, instead of like nicely delineated rows of, whatever, cucumbers and mustard greens and whatever, you just had these kind of more like swatches that went across. Somebody had tried to impose order on the garden before. They put like lines of old plywood down, but he just kind of would scatter the seeds all over it like a painting, almost like Jackson Pollock. And I just loved that because it went so counter to my training, my way of being raised, and certainly like what I learned from my father. So I went with that energy, and I think that's the way that I've learned from Thay as well. I watched Thay. It's not that Thay didn't have any projects. Thay was giving people a project every single day. And so part of the thing is that these are all projects that Thay either personally gave me or to other, generally to the Sangha, that I feel I'm, continuing to the best I can. And I don't think I'll ever be able to finish them. But that's also for my younger brothers and sisters. If they want, if they don't want, then it just dies out, right? So it's a bit like planting seeds in a garden, and you do your best to kind of nurture it, but then sometimes you just have to let it go and see if it grows on its own. And if nobody responds, then just let it go. So I think it's not about having lots of projects. It's more just about being able to let it go, and not let those projects create difficulty for the Sangha. I have to admit I've certainly been unskillful in the past, and continue sometimes to be unskillful in the way I put forward a project or an idea, and then the community gets upset and everybody yells at me. But, when I was a young novice, because I was raised to be very responsible and, cross every T and dot every I. And so, it's kind of anathema to my upbringing to, not to micromanage every single thing that I start. But when I did that earlier on in the Sangha, I learned that actually I might complete a project that actually the Sangha doesn't need or want. even though I did everything myself, at the end, nobody wanted to continue doing that. So I think, well, what was the purpose of that? Was it just for a personal, like, pat on the back? Or if it's not contributing to the life of the Sangha in a positive way, then, why do it? So part of it is like you throw the seeds out and then you see, well, does that seed grow in Escondido, California, up in the mountains? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it would grow in France, but it doesn't grow here. Right? It's not a plant that's suited to this climate. So I think, it's more, that's the way I see it. It's just that spirit that Thay had of throwing out ideas and then seeing if, there's anybody interested. And if nobody interested, just let it go. And then it's okay. I don't stress out about it. And then I can sit in meditation. No, I don't say that different thoughts and ideas don't come to mind when I'm in sitting meditation, but I don't, I feel much more capable of just letting them go and just saying, well, whatever happens is fine. And, holding to the principle of non-harming. We need to look in everything we're doing. Are we harming people? And usually you can tell by the intention. Is there, you're doing it out of jealousy? Are you doing it out of anger or to get somebody back? Or are you doing it out of love? Are you out of a genuine care for other people? And also the way that it manifests in the Sangha will tell you if you can't see for yourself. So, and I'm about to turn 50 in a couple of years, so I feel, anyway, it's just a moment in my time, in my life, when this is going to be like that. There's a lot of things starting, and then, now I feel lately I'm shifting more into kind of curating or just, taking care. I felt, I got some signals from the Sangha in the past 6 months that, okay, this is enough. Enough ideas from Brother Phap Luu. So it's like, okay, you just shift into a different gear and just go more towards like taking care of what's already there and what's been growing on its own, as it were, meaning like is of interest to others and who also are inspired by that, and taking care of that. Because our life is very limited. It's very short. At the same time, our life is unlimited. But this, in this body, we are limited. So I feel I just want to transmit everything that I receive from Thay. And I feel all of our brothers and sisters, I see in every one of, even those who get very angry at me and disagree, I see they're also manifesting Thay. So I always practice to listen to them and try to change my way, because they're also manifesting some aspect of Thay and what Thay transmitted to us. And so now that Thay is present in the Sangha body in many brothers and sisters. And so I cherish every one of my brothers and sisters, even the ones who haven't met Thay in person, because they received something through Thay's teaching. And it's not like, I'm sure that one of our younger brothers will have much deeper insight than either you or I do in the future about this, and be, a great community builder, a great, Zen master of the America. I'm sure of it. But I can do my best to transmit what I receive from Thay, and also what I receive from my ancestors, and do it with the spirit of non-expectation. Just smile, enjoy planting the seeds. You plant the seeds, you enjoy 100% planting the seeds. You water the plant, you enjoy 100% watering the plant. You don't have an expectation of eating a tomato, but you enjoy that moment of watering the tomatoes. And then you pick the suckers out of the tomato, you enjoy picking the suckers out. You don't get caught and you don't start salivating about how tasty the tomato is going to be. You just enjoy that moment of pulling the suckers out. So every part of the process I enjoy, of whatever project that happens, and I enjoy it as it is. Like recently we did an online retreat, and one of my younger sisters, she really wanted to, lead that retreat. So I just learned to step aside. It's something that I also really enjoy doing, but I learned, okay, she's motivated to do it. I can step out of the way and just be more of a support and let her lead the way. It's okay, because it's all good. It's, this is ultimately, I don't want to be the one who's like, oh, Brother Phap Luu is the leader, but I want the transformation to happen in the retreat. So the best way to do that is to maintain the harmony as best as I can in the organizing team, and and find a skillful way to not lose the essence of what we're doing, which is creating conditions for transformation and healing to happen. So anyway, it's not that I don't ever get attached anymore to projects or feel a little bit hurt when they are not, the community doesn't accept. Like, we had a science retreat here, and we're taking a year off from it. It's something I enjoy doing very much. And so that was, sometimes not easy to let go of that, but, I let go. And because I see that's for the good of the community and the growth of the community. And that's the most important thing, not the project.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Thay.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a personal question, but I think it relates to the idea that a lot of people have about monastic life. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I feel like I have this idea about what it means to be a monk, and if I'm not living that idea, then I must be doing it wrong. Like there's this part of me that still feels like I should just be sitting all the time or reading sutras. And, I think many people have this expectation of monastics. So I'm kind of interested in the degree that it's infiltrated my own thinking, even now having lived at the monastery for some time. But to me, it seems that you've always had a very different relationship to that idea of monastic life. I mean, you practice sitting, you attend the schedule, and you study sutras, but you also play instruments, you exercise, you read books about science and history. So I'm wondering how I can, and others can, have a healthier relationship with this idea that we have about monastic life. Mm-hmm. In other words, how do we use the ideal of monastic life without being caught in that idea?
Yeah, I think the only way is to realize it in your own daily life. So it's not something that I could necessarily describe to anyone, because there's just some point where it just feels like you just, in everything you're doing, you just feel like a monk. But it takes more than 10 years, for me at least. Usually the rule of thumb I use is that when you start dreaming and you're a monk in your dreams, almost all of the time. Like now, it almost never happens that I have a dream where I'm not a monk. But that wasn't true for many of the first years I was a monastic, right? So somehow all these certain practices that we associate with monastic life are part of monastic life, but that's not the essence of it. You can't reduce monastic life to just reading the sutras and chanting and meditation and daily schedule. Although, from my point of view, those practices are essential to the training of a monastic. I think we could use more in the American culture and the approach to Buddhism, a more disciplined approach and, more respectfulness, I think, towards the sutras. We tend to, most of us are trained in modern, literary criticism. So we tend to look, hold the text at a, arm's distance, and there isn't a respect in which, the therapeutic and transformative nature of the texts as they've been transmitted to us from the ancestors don't have a chance to come in. We don't open our hearts enough to that, and that's there could be some complex of superiority there, which is residue from European civilization and other factors. So I've always, I have that devotional aspect in me as well. I'm very grateful to the Buddha. I think like Krishnamurti said, if I knew the Buddha were teaching somewhere, there's nothing that could stop me from going and listening. So I have that aspect. There's no question that the Buddha Dhamma has completely transformed my life. And so I love to hear the Dhamma taught by my brothers and sisters when they have a deep insight. I have deep respect for sisters and brothers and sisters who, many sisters are deeply realized in our community, and I have utmost respect for them when I see their compassion and understanding. So for me, it's not a matter of gender either. Of course, I'm in a male body. Sometimes I resonate more with, male teachers, if I'm honest, like Thay. Sometimes I think we just say, in Vietnamese, they say cơ duyên, the causes and conditions are different for different people. And so sometimes we find the teacher that we need to find. So for me, that was Thay. And, but, some of Thay's nun students, my elder sisters, and some younger sisters, very deeply realized people. And so I listen. I feel that energy, and I listen when they talk. It's not the same for me as just anybody, who's just hanging around the monastery and trying to find their way. I have love and compassion. It's not like I consciously distinguish, but it's just something. There's something there, and when you hear true insight that you can feel in your core, and it resonates very deeply. And so, that I don't know that the true Dhamma, you feel it somehow in your body. So so it's not in reciting the sutras only. It's not in but it's not in reciting the sutras. It's not in the daily practice either, right? So that's a part that I think I can't help but express the view that I see coming back, especially from Plum Village after 11 years there, over the 2010s, during the time Thay had a stroke, and then the afterwards, and helping, how do we keep the community going in the direction that Thay has set after Thay cannot teach anymore in his normal form. When I came back to the U.S., I'm very aware that I'm coming to a very, Protestant country in the sense that it's, in the Christian sense, but also in a kind of ideological sense. It's like kind of deep in the marrow of American culture, this kind of Protestantism. And so a deep distrust of any kind of religious appurtenances or a religious form like clergy. And I think most of our history we've had this love-hate relationship with the ordained in America, and that's a product of the terrible trauma of the Reformation in European culture on both sides, not take one side or the other, but it's just this kind of wars of ideology that were underpinned by land grabs and power and struggle and so forth that just tore apart Europe are still resonating today in the way that American society and especially white bodies experience conflict and political discord in the U.S. So there's my 20 seconds of cultural analysis. So take it or leave it as you will. But I feel like coming to being a monk in America is we tend to. I mean, it's ironic in a way. The Protestant culture is to take the Bible very literally on the one hand, but then disregard everything else, like human relationship. So it's a kind of ideological obsession with written words on a page. And so on the one hand, as Buddhists, we built into the tradition is this kind of release, right? Which is that you must release the Dhamma, how much more so non-Dhamma, right? The Buddha said in the Diamond Sutra, in other places, right? Like older texts, right? That quote is not only in the Diamond Sutra, but in, I think, The Better Way to Catch a Snake as well. And so older sutras from the early layers of teachings. And I think that built-in kind of release valve where we cannot get caught in Buddhist ideology, that the teaching that has helped us the most, even that we can't get caught in it in a dogmatic way. I think that has a deep kind of salve for the wounds of the American psyche, as it were. So I do feel there's a deep gift that can be given to this continent from Buddhist teachings that resonate with many indigenous teachings as well. Although I'm not an expert to speak about that, but that's what I hear from many of our friends in the community with native training and native practice, Anishinaabe or Navajo or whatever, Lakota religious practices, that there is a kind of deep continent with indigenous practices in Buddhism. So yeah, I feel like there's this confrontation of I don't know, confrontation. I think it's more of a infiltration, or I was trying to find a better word.
Integration.
Yeah, like flowing into, like a confluence of Buddhist culture with Western, so-called Western culture, or European culture is historical. I mean, Emerson was reading the Bhagavad Gita. Emerson's one of our greatest luminaries, right? So it's not that there hasn't been this strand of deep spiritual insight from India and China and other places in the world. It's just that now it's more coming to light. Now we see more clearly that some of our greatest writers, greatest teachers are actually already deeply in this path, and we are a continuation, and they are our ancestors. Thoreau did the first translation of a section of the Lotus Sutra into English from a French translation. So some of the greatest, I consider to be our greatest ancestors in terms of the spiritual path in America are also informed by Buddhist insights. And we are their continuation. So it's kind of American enlightenment, I think, that's happening. So even in the midst of, some of the worst polarization that this continent has ever seen, I think there's an awakening going on, a collective awakening. It's understandable we're so divided. I mean, for 20 years, the U.S. was the undisputed world superpower with no one else around to contest it, and we're not easily willing to let go of that mantle. And so the division we're experiencing today is, I think, quite simply the quite natural, fallout from that, from 1990 to 2010. And now we find ourselves suddenly not in that position alone anymore. And that's a very unsettling feeling for for an empire. And so who knows what will happen. But we better have a deep practice in order to take care of our emotions. So that's why I feel I resonate deeply with Thay's teaching us in 2010 how we can help young people to take care of our emotions around the climate crisis, all the different crises we're facing, the destruction of biodiversity, political conflict in the world. Wars are now starting. It's supposed to be the end of wars. Why are new wars starting? Well, maybe we haven't been paying attention to the suffering deeply enough. And the key for me is having this practice. I mean, wow. With this practice, I know I can always come back to the bones in my body, even when my emotions are overwhelming me. I can find solidity in some part of me and not act out of anger or fear or hatred. And that is a great gift of the Dhamma. And I have a lot of hope. But we're facing difficulty, and I think it's not about to end in terms of how we as a collective here are being challenged day to day. But I think the more and more people are waking up, and we're changing history. It doesn't mean we won't have suffering, but we're changing. Without that element, then our path would be much darker. And so, it gives me hope. And living here in the community gives me a lot of hope. Going up on the mountain with my brothers and sisters gives me a lot of hope. So I love to do it. It's like, why do I want to lay in bed? Go up the mountain and drink tea with my brothers and sisters, because that kind of joy of living in community is so rare to find in this world. And every day I live and I remain alive, I appreciate that more. Thay's vision for doing it as a community, that doing it alone is not enough. And I'm so grateful to my brothers and sisters that we're living it together and in a mostly harmonious way.
At least 60%.
At least 60%. And and the harmony in Deer Park is, I think, it's near 90% right now. It's very high. And I am so grateful for that. So it's so easy to let go of things and step back and let other people lead, because it's so precious to live in a community that has that much harmony. Very precious. So I see more and more. Before I used to be, like a typical American, just caught in my ideas and wanting to impose them on everybody else. But now I just see this can be so damaging. So I really feel in my gut, in my whole body, like the harmony of the community when it's there. And I just see it's that lots of people have philosophies and ideas, but very few people have community that living and practicing the Dhamma in harmony. And so that is our, I think, precious gift to the world. And then we're being a true continuation of Thay. That's Thay's greatest wish. He just wants our monastics to live in harmony and lay community. And so I feel we're doing what Thay asked us to do.
You've answered this quite a bit already, but to conclude, I want to see if you wanted to elaborate any further on why do you feel that monastic life is an appropriate response to all that we've been discussing so far?
Well, first I'll say monastic life is not for everyone. So I can't tell you how many times people have come up and say, well, if everybody became a monastic, then da-da-da-da. And so who said everyone should become a monastic? But I think because we're trained when we study democracy or whatever political system that it should apply to everybody. So we have that kind of reaction. So just start monastic life is not for everybody. It's not even for a large number of people, I think. But I think that monastics play an important role in balancing the energy in the collective society. And they have for thousands of years. And they often do that in a nameless and formless way. So it's difficult to say, because it's not that they do one thing or the other. Sometimes they say the opposite of the thing they said, yesterday. And it's because it's more like we're emptying ourselves of ideas and concepts and being in the moment. So we're actually doing our best to play a role of balancing. So, famously, the sixth patriarch told his students to go out and just contradict everybody, to help people see not to be so sure of themselves. Because mostly it's not that you're right or you're wrong. It's that you're so sure you're right and you're so sure the other person's wrong. That's where the suffering comes in. And so that's why Thay asks us, are you sure? So it's really this element of rigidity of getting caught in an idea of dogma that is so harmful. So not everybody needs to be a monastic, but I think we need more monastics. We definitely need a lot more than we have now in order to really help with that balancing. So we need to have young people who have that inclination. And so to know whether you have that inclination, you have to come and practice with the community and see whether you enjoy living with the community. If you don't like living in the community, you can't just be living out your ideal of a monastic that's somehow different from the way the community lives. So whatever community you come to, you have to, look at how they're living and, live the way they do and see, does this bring you joy? Does it bring you happiness? And if it doesn't, then go somewhere else. So I'd encourage young people to go, shop around. I even tell young people who are super determined to become monks and nuns in our tradition, I say, go check other places out first. And sometimes they do, and then they come back and they know what else is out there, and they know why they're committing to this community. But I've had also instances where they completely did not do what I asked them to do. And then, they left within a year or two because they're just so stubborn. It's harder when you become a monastic to go check out other communities. And I'm aware in Western culture, but especially in American culture, we tend to shop around a lot in everything we do in life, whether it's our romantic partner or whether it's our career or whether it's our spiritual path. And that's more kind of our built-in dogma. We're professional consumerists, and so whether it's sex, whether it's work, whether it's our spiritual path, we tend to just we kind of we take it and then we're easy to throw it away when the slightest obstacle comes up or difficulty. And I think that comes from a general misunderstanding of what a spiritual path is all about. Most people just are looking for, just to give me as much joy as possible. They want to they come on a retreat, they experience a lot of joy, so they just expect that the spiritual path is going to be just endless joy. And so when they drop everything and become a monk, they're quite surprised at how much suffering they encounter. But that suffering is ancestral. It's not only from this lifetime and many generations. And so you should be grateful for your suffering. Your suffering is your greatest teacher. So the worst thing to do is when suffering comes up, you just drop everything and go to another community, because you're going to find the same thing in that other community. And many brothers and sisters who left our community, they reported that to be true. So it's not just me, conjecturing like that. But by then it became very difficult for them to come back. And that's why I always tell people who ask about monastic life, I say, be careful. For most people, that door only opens once. Don't think, oh, when I turn 40, I'll become a monastic, or, after I finish this, I'll become a monastic. If you have that mentality, it's not likely you'll ever become a monastic. I'll be quite frank with you. The experience is such that, that door probably won't open again. And there's something about being a monastic life that just makes you want to drop everything else in your life and just, go through that one door of monastic training and awakening. And you feel it through your whole body. And I felt that way. I saw that everything else was not important compared to this. And I've continued to feel that. I mean, that was just, I always had this, maybe my parents got divorced, so I had a lot of skepticism about marriage. And I always felt I could never get up there and say, till death do us part. Sounds like a horrible kind of, like a death sentence almost, in a certain way. But I know that some people feel that in the whole of their heart. And there is a way in which we can live in a romantic relationship, I'm sure, that incorporates impermanence. And we see that this is a deep commitment to be with another human being for the whole of our life, despite whatever we encounter. But anyway, that's what I had as a young person. I just couldn't see myself saying that. But when I learned about the monastic path, I said right away, I knew that I can commit to. This I know, I'm very sure about. And so far, it's worked out okay. I certainly don't have the intention to do anything else. So unless somebody kicks me out, or sometimes I joke with the community. I said, by now I would have gotten fired at least once or twice if you could fire a monk. But it's very difficult to, if we keep our precepts, you continue to be a monk, right? And so I take my precepts body very seriously. And, and I also practice to take good care of my relationships. But certainly I've made, mistakes in the past. And so I try to learn from them the best I can and do better. And, but I feel for sure. We used to have a brother Phap Luu, that some of you listening may have known here at Deer Park. He was a Catholic priest as a young man, and then went off to do many other things in his life, including working in finance, and eventually found his way to Plum Village and actually became a monk. I think when he was 60 or something like that, in his 60s. And he was a great mentor of mine. My parents were raised Catholic, so I always felt this connection to him, even though I was not baptized. He used to say, by now I would have fired some of these guys, some of the monks in the monastery. These were his elder brothers. And so I often think sometimes, I think I probably would have gotten fired by now. But I think that's what's great about being a monk, is that, nobody can really force you to do anything, because we're not getting paid for this. And you keep your precepts, you keep to be a monk. As long as you keep practicing, Thay said, you can always stay in the monastery. So sometimes it means we upset other people's expectations. And I've had to upset other people's expectations because I just felt they're being too dogmatic. It's just to help them to see the kind of rigidity of their ways. And people have done the same for me too. So I feel it's a service we offer to one another. But if you're out there in the world, your boss, you want to transform his Shabbat energy, good luck, because you just cancel your salary, your contract, right? So you get a bit of severance. But as a monk, sometimes we have to give that kind of deep, compassionate teaching to each other in order to help each other wake up to the rigidity or, that grasping that's still there in our consciousness. And so that's the beauty of spiritual community.
Thanks so much for listening. Each week we'll release another interview, so please subscribe. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please help us spread the word. Today's episode is produced and edited by Kenley Neufeld and Brother Nyet Un, with special thanks to Brother Phap Luu for sitting with me and sharing his story. Music is generously offered to us by Benjamin Portson and Alex Klein. Meet the Monastics is recorded at Deer Park Monastery, a mindfulness practice center in the Plum Village tradition of Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh in Escondido, California, on the traditional and unceded lands of the Kumeyaay Nation, to whom we extend our gratitude and respect. Deer Park offers mindfulness retreats and public days of mindfulness throughout the year, and a 5-year monastic training program for 18 to 35-year-olds. If you're interested in visiting, check out our website, deerparkmonastery.org, or follow us on social media. I'm Brother Manan. See you next week.